Maha, blessings, Sadhvi ji. It is just an absolute pleasure to have you join us this evening here, daytime where you are. And before we jump right into it, I'll just ask that everyone take a moment to pause, to close your eyes. If Anjali, hands at prayer feels good, great. If hands on heart feels nice for you, please do that. But do close your eyes and enter the abode of your heart and the beautiful flow of all that is that brings us together at this time on the eve of this full moon. To bask in the story, the teachings, the life that is Sadhvi, and the example that it gives us to live truthfully and clearly in our own lives, in our corner of the world. And so we ask that for each of us, the highest unfolds in this session for those who listen to the recording after, that we're all here in consciousness to receive all that we need to share and to offer through us. And so it is. Beautiful. And so, Sadhvi, welcome. We have,
So happy to be with you.
we just turn up so I can hear you. Speak again. I'll just make sure our volume is good.
I just said I'm so happy to be with you.
Me too. I
And
mean,
your
I
cat.
yeah, exactly. My dog
You got a
Yogi,
dog.
actually.
Oh,
Yeah, of course her name is Yogi. Her name is Yogi. She's a yogi. So welcome to the Sacred Reads Collective. We have about 60 members now, actually, globally. And the intention is that we each read the same book over a period of, 6 to 8 weeks, and then we join together in an online satsang. And so to kick off our book club, we started with Puja Swami's book, which I thought was quite apt because, well, A, you're the author of that as well. But he gave me that book, and it was like 5 years later, I sort of knew I had needed a book club since I was given the book. And so it was a beautiful segue into the teachings. And for yourself on my path, I mean, this book, for those of us who have read it, and there's many of you on the screen that have already come to India and experienced Paramath and the ashram where Sadhvi lives, this book is a game changer. And Sadhvi, I just want to begin by saying that it is a rare gift to have direct communication with someone like yourself who understands the West, its challenges, the lifestyle, and that unexplainable pull to the East that we each share. And that doesn't mean we necessarily understand it or that it even makes a lot of sense. And yet, in your book, we read your experience of that. And I know every single one of us relates in our own way to your story. And as I was popping my notes down here, I was like, these main themes of your book are the ability to surrender, right? Whether it's surrender to God or to surrender to the experience that we find ourselves in. The aspect of devotion, of living devotion daily. And then the big ticket item of faith, the elusive faith that we're asked to explore. And so I guess I wanted to begin by offering you the mic in your own words to share how you, I guess, managed yourself in that moment of surrender, going to India, not having the experience that you thought you were going to have, and yet falling into this experience of the expanse of the divine.
Yeah, beautiful. So for me, it really is about saying yes. And that was the turning point for me. long before I got to India, while I was actually still on the airplane to India, I had that conversation with myself that I will always be so incredibly grateful for. You know, I was an academic. I was a scientist, as anyone who's read the book knows, and I was not someone inclined towards spirituality simply because I never really thought that it pertained to me. I never thought that I was qualified for it, that I was a spiritual person, or that I could be a spiritual person. It seemed like, the things that a spiritual person would do or know or experience were just not part of my daily life. They were not part of how I understood myself, how I moved through the world. And so I really felt kind of disqualified in many ways from being spiritual. And that didn't prevent me from enjoying the samosas and chai at, the occasional thing that I went to while still living in California. But it definitely did not draw me in a spiritual quest to India. And then I find myself sitting on an airplane on the way to India, knowing almost nothing about the country, except that I really liked the food. And I was a very strict vegetarian and knew that wherever I was in the world, if I could just find an Indian restaurant, I would be able to eat pure vegetarian food without having arguments with waiters in languages that I didn't speak about, the stock of a vegetable soup or what they boiled rice in or things like that. And yet on that airplane, I had this conversation with myself in which I said, this makes no sense. I'm traveling across the world to a place I know almost nothing about, that I have no particular direct inner calling to go to, and a place where the only or the strongest point for me was that I could get good Indian vegetarian food when I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. And, even 30 years ago, you could get Indian vegetarian food on every corner. So the trip made absolutely no sense whatsoever. I was not a wanderer. I was not someone who just did things like that. And so I had this conversation on the airplane in which I said to myself, okay, this makes no sense. I'm traveling halfway across the world to a place I know basically nothing about, a place whose most, strongest redeeming factor was the food that I could also get on my corner. And the whole thing just seemed totally absurd. I was in the midst of this PhD program that I really was enjoying. And so I said to myself, okay, there must be a reason I'm going that I'm just not aware of. I always had believed very deeply in what I called a capital P plan, and therefore a capital P planner. And so I really took a vow on the airplane that I was just going to keep my heart open, to find out why I was going to India, because all of the logical reasons I gave myself added up to basically zero. And yet I knew that nothing happened for no reason. I always had that belief in a plan and therefore a planner. So I vowed to just keep my heart open. And that vow really was the turning point, I think, for me. And it's something that I will always be so deeply grateful for, because it really pushed me to keep my heart open, even in experiences that to the academic scientist in me seemed completely crazy, seemed unbelievable. And yet, because I had vowed to keep my heart open, I didn't let myself slither away pretending that, I hadn't just heard a voice to say, stay here, that I hadn't just had my feet glued to the ground, that I really had created a foundational ground that, even before I realized how deeply I would need it, that forced me to be present, to be open, to be willing, to be sincere, to be surrendered on that level. And that was really the most critical and valuable aspects of it.
There's a moment, in your surrender that really struck me in that when Swamiji said to you, give it to Ganga, like, when are you going to give it up on your deathbed? Whatever our struggles are, this was in relation to this question about when are we going to give it away? And he says to you, give it to Ganga. And with all of your logic and your words of like, you know, your logical mind, how do you give your trauma, your drama, your whatever it is to a river? And you used the words in one of the interviews that really I found profound. You said, I was able to tap a level of sincerity in that moment
Yeah.
that seemingly made all the difference. And I know that, many of us on the screen and listening have been to India. We've sat around the pujas that we don't necessarily understand at the level of the logical mind. And so, can you speak to that palpable feeling of that sincerity that you found was so valuable
Yeah, first of all, so on a neurological level, which I did not know at the time, but I have since learned afterwards. One of the reasons that so many of us have such difficulty overcoming deep trauma, deep issues, deep pain is because so much of it happens in early childhood when our brain waves are actually different than they are now. They're not what we would consider conscious mind brain waves. And yet, we try to use our conscious brain to talk to our unconscious or subconscious mind. And that's where so many of us struggle. And it was exactly the struggle that I had been in, where I had a conscious mind that said, okay, this eating disorder that's basically going to kill you is not going to bring back my biological father and make him come back and apologize for the abuse and the abandonment and sort of say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I made such an awful mistake and let me fix it. That it was not going to do that. He had had plenty of opportunities to repent, to apologize, and he had made it very clear that that was not on his agenda. And no matter how sick I got, it wasn't going to bring the desired subconscious effect. So it wasn't going to bring that. It wasn't going to heal the pain that I felt inside. It wasn't going to make me feel whole, full, complete, healthy, worthy, valuable. There was no amount of food I could stuff myself with that was going to make me feel whole, complete. And I knew this. I mean, I had spent years by that time in therapy, in hospitals, in eating disorder units, in groups, individuals. I mean, I had done it all. I could have written a book about my eating disorder, about my depression, about my anxiety. And yet, it didn't translate into a significant shift in the emotional state or even in the behavior. I got a little bit better at like behavior modification, but it didn't impact the deep emotional space that led me into the eating disorder to begin with. And what I learned much later was that that's a situation that a huge percentage of people struggling with addiction, eating disorders, mental health issues have, which is we could explain very clearly, very cogently why we are depressed, anxious, insecure, addicted, etc. And yet, all of that conscious mind, intellectual explanation and understanding doesn't actually trickle down or permeate into the subconscious wounded part of ourselves. And that's where you don't get healing. You get understanding, but you don't get healing. Ritual, it turns out, again, I had no idea at the time, but it turns out that ritual, much like meditation, much like hypnosis, much like plant medicine, much like other techniques that people use to access deep and otherwise unavailable wounded parts of themselves, actually take us back into the brainwave state from that childhood when we were injured. And so ritual actually has the power to get us able to talk to and therefore heal that subconscious, that unconscious mind much better than our conscious mind simply trying to say, you know, just by engaging in these behaviors, just by drinking alcohol, just by using drugs, just by being promiscuous, I'm not solving anything, which so many of us tell ourselves, and it doesn't benefit us, it doesn't help. But ritual gets us into that state of mind. So when you come to India, when you sit in these pujas, whether you understand them or not is actually irrelevant, as long as you allow yourself to open mind, heart to the vibrational energy, the chanting, the ceremony, the prayers, the mantras. If you allow yourself to get into that, and in a way, sometimes it's actually even more beneficial when you don't understand it, because then the intellectual mind is bypassed. Otherwise, the intellectual mind is like, oh, I heard that word. Oh, I understood that word. Oh, yeah, this part means this. And we get into thinking mind. But if you can bypass thinking mind and just be present in the ritual, in the ceremony, it actually has the power to bring you into the state of brain, quite literally, quite scientifically, in which you can heal. For me, it was a matter of post ritual, post arti, standing in the river in a very deliberate, very conscious act of sincerity. I was absolutely sure it was not going to work. I knew there was no way it was going to work. I had convinced myself it wasn't going to work. And yet, I committed to being present and sincere and willing and open. And that turned out to be actually all that was needed. Because every time my conscious mind came in and said, this isn't going to work, this is stupid, the power of my vow, my sankalp, to be sincere overweighed that little conscious voice that was like, this isn't going to work. My mind said, I know that. It's okay. Be quiet. Like, we know it's not going to work. And yet, we've committed to sincerity. And so I was able to generate a presence of mind. And by the way, this is really important also. There's been a lot of recent research, again, since I had this experience, around the power of sankalp, the power of vow, and really taking a sacred vow, not a New Year's resolution that you're going to, lose 10 pounds by the spring equinox or something, but a spiritual vow, a sankalp that I am going to commit to a certain behavior, a certain action. Sankalps have to do with showing up. It's not about the fruit. It's not about the results. It's about the showing up. Whenever we do, for example, a fire ceremony, prior to the fire ceremony, we have the sankalp. And we vow not what the results of the fire ceremony are going to be, but we vow to show up fully, completely, with presence, with consciousness, with intention to this ceremony. And there's been a lot of research now on the power of sankalp. And without knowing that, I took this sankalp to be sincere. At that time, I took it just out of respect to Swamiji, that I was going to, stop mocking what seemed to me this completely implausible suggestion to give my trauma to a river. But the vow to just show up sincerely turned out to be the deciding factor that actually enabled me, even with a conscious mind that thought there was no way it was going to work, that enabled me to actually give my pain and the story to this sacred river.
And so when did you know that on some level it had transmuted, shifted, changed? Because you said again in an interview that after that you did what any normal person would do, and you kept looking for your old pattern. And it
Yeah. I don't know if it's what every normal person would do. It's certainly what every overeducated, over-indoctrinated person addicted to their own dis-ease or dysfunction would do, which was basically say, there's no way this happened. I'm still sick. I'm still dysfunctional. I'm still diseased. It must be here somewhere. There is no way that I have now become a worthy, full human being. Honestly, Deborah, my heart knew in that moment that I stood in Ganga. Like, I knew it. I knew the moment I was standing there. I knew the moment I walked out that it was gone. But the overeducated, over-indoctrinated brain definitely spent the next several months looking for it. I mean, I just kept waiting for me to decompensate in psychological lingo and, find myself bending over a toilet, throwing up. And days went by and it didn't happen. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. And suddenly me, for whom, meals were a major, major issue, found herself sitting on the ground in a line of yellow clad boys singing as we waited for someone to dump food that I had no idea what it was onto my plate from a huge metal bucket that I couldn't even see what it was until it landed on my plate, in a situation where the rule was you got to finish everything on your plate. And suddenly I was able to do that happily with no problem whatsoever. And it just went away. But all of it, I was seeing so much of the dissipation of the pain, dissipation of the story. I mean, even prior to that moment, when I had just had the feeling of knowing that I was meant to stay in the ashram, and I had just had that powerful experience on Ganga before Puja Swamiji even had me give my pain, when my husband was going off into the mountains, as per our schedule. And I had changed my schedule because I had finally met Swamiji and he had said I could stay at the ashram. Well, for someone who had been abandoned by her biological father at 8, I had major abandonment issues. And that was a major thing for me in all of my relationships. And there was no conceivable way that I ever would have let my husband just wander off into the mountains, leaving me. I mean, remember, this was a pre-mobile phone age. It wasn't like, oh, well, text me when you get there. It was, we had email back in America, but India didn't yet have it. So it wasn't even like there was some place where he was going to find a cyber cafe in Badrinath and email me. It didn't exist. So there was no way that I would have 3 days prior let him go off into the mountains and leave me behind in a place where I knew no one. And yet, because of the power of the experience I had had, I knew I was meant to stay there. And when he said he was going off into the mountains anyway, and he didn't want to stay, I was unfazed. Like there wasn't even a bit of me that felt like, oh no, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? Is he going to come back? It was just such a sense of, okay, here we are. I'm exactly where I need to be, and you do exactly what you need to do. And it's all exactly right, and it's all exactly perfect. And that was even before I was sent into Ganga to give my pain.
So the evidence for you was there and it was real. Like you're seeing this separation from the old patterns. This surrender to is huge, and something that I had a beautiful conversation with Amy, who's here tonight. We spoke today about the challenges of sharing yoga in our modern Western worlds to roomfuls of people who come from various faiths. And we're given the Yoga Sutras and we're given the Ishvara Pranidhana, and we're told, surrender to the divine, surrender to God. And then the mind, but what God? Do I have to believe in Hanuman? What is that? And so something that, I've loved hearing from you and from Swamiji over the years is give it any name, give it no name, right? And that the non-negotiable behind it is the faith, right? Is the actual actioned faith in that process. But I would love you to share, for those of us who are in these rooms of various people with various backgrounds, how we can help bridge the gap, or maybe even offer some ways in to these teachings that allow everyone to go there. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. So it doesn't matter what you call it, as you said, any name, no name, any form, no form. I know a lot of people, especially in the West, are somewhat allergic in a way to the word God, the name God, the idea of religion. And it's sad because if we've developed that type of allergy or aversion, it's because something has happened in our life that has kind of turned us off of religion, or maybe it's just because we see the news and we see what is done in the name of God and what is done in the name of religion. But something turns us off, and that's okay. You can think about it as cosmic intelligence. You can think about it as source. You can think about it as spirit. It doesn't matter how you conceive of it, but it's the idea of there being something that is bigger, more, deeper than just your physical body, that is constantly changing, that is just the role, the relationships, the career, the bank account, that is something beyond that. And, that's something really, really easy to access when you just drop within. Most of us at some point of our lives have had that type of experience. It may be watching a sunrise. It may be watching a sunset. It may be staring into the eyes of your newborn child for the first time. It could be staring into the eyes of somebody else's newborn child. It could be so much. One of the things that I share that always makes people laugh, but it's so true for me, which is I have really deep and profound spiritual experiences opening up NASA's Instagram feed because every time I see a nebula or another galaxy you're like, wow. I mean, just wow, this incredible creation, this incredible universe, this incredible existence that we are so blessed to be part of. And then you look at the picture and you realize, okay, based on how many light years away from us and away from the telescope that took this picture, that image that I'm seeing that is so beautiful actually existed anywhere between many thousands to tens of millions of years ago. And then you are in that place of, oh my God, I am beholding this extraordinary exquisiteness that doesn't actually even exist right now. What I'm seeing is how the universe looked, 12 million years ago, or something outrageous like that. And for me, that just never fails to send me into one of those tears pouring out of my eyes moments of divine connection. Because for me, there's no other way of understanding the power and the exquisiteness of this creation. So, do you have to believe in Hanuman? Of course not. Watch a sunrise, watch the stars in the night sky, go to NASA's Instagram feed, pick up a baby, hug a tree, float in an ocean. Whatever it is that makes you feel deeply connected, that's all you need.
And I think you illustrate that in your Give It to Ganga moment, that I often say spiritual as broken down into spirit ritual. Like, how do we connect to something? So if the word spiritual tends to, just chop it up a little bit and see if you can find a way in. But, you weren't at that time giving it to the goddess Ganges, right? You were literally giving it to a river as
Yes.
an emanation of the divine.
I didn't even know the river was an emanation of the divine. That was actually something that I learned much later. I did not know this river is the mother goddess. I really just thought river. And that's also what's so beautiful is the power of grace to transform us, whether we are specifically looking for it or not, as long as we are open and willing.
Which is perfect because that segues into my big question for you is about this moment of, the entering of the awakening, whether it was when you stood in Ganga and experienced the bliss, the ecstatic tears. I've read the stories of, who can we think of? Eckhart Tolle, Sadhguru, so many people had an experience without any, in this life stream anyway, predetermined sadhana. Right? And so I always find it quite interesting. And I think Ladhu Baba, that was often around the banks of Ganga in Rishikesh. And he said it's very difficult to surrender to something you don't understand. And yet once you have the experience of it, it's easy to let everything else go. So there is either I have no idea in the innocence of it all, and then, here's the experience, and now I'm all in. Or I give myself as the example, doing the sadhana with, is it this lifetime? Is it another lifetime? You have people who were born divine, sharing the sadhana, but they in this lifetime didn't do it. And so I guess this speaks to the ongoing devotion, the not giving up, the trusting that it's working for those of us who are like, on the path. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, we are all born divine. None of us is not divine. It just has to do with how thick or thin that veil is. And I think absolutely what you're saying is correct. Just keep doing the sadhana, keep having the trust. But along with that, what I would say is keep giving yourself the possibility of felt sense experience, of union with a presence that is greater than you, that doesn't feel like your typical body experience. So it's not, oh, that's my elbow. And, it's something that we all have in moments of, for example, just romantic love. Like, you know, what makes, for example, sensual, sexual ecstasy so wonderful is for a brief moment, we forget where we end and the other begins. It is a moment of two becomes one, borders, boundaries dissolve. The problem, of course, is, 5, 7, 10 minutes later, borders, boundaries come back and we're exactly where we were before. But what it does is it at least shows us that we do have that capacity, um, even in just our normal lives. And so, what I would say is look for opportunities. And again, for me, they tend to be around nature: sunrises, sunsets, stars in the sky, lying in the dirt, lying in the ocean, floating in the ocean. Um, Moments of looking into and through the eyes of a child, hugging a tree, experiences of connecting to spirit, source, creative intelligence that isn't dependent upon what my brain is going to figure out, but that just is. And we tap into it. And so I would really look for that. A lot of people feel that in group kirtan, for example. So you may not necessarily believe in Hanuman, and yet sitting in a group of 30, 40, 100 people chanting Jai Hanuman might actually give you a felt sense experience of divine oneness and connection, even if it's not specifically about Hanumanji himself.
And there's the teaching that I've heard you share a few times about the many ways into Ganga. Will you share that story to complete about the all in?
Yeah, sure. So the spiritual path is multifaceted, infinitely faceted, meaning any path works. If you think about it as a metaphor with Ganga, for example, which is what I share a lot, is the goal is to get into Ganga. Ganga as the river, as the mother goddess, is seen as the liberator, the grantor of freedom, liberation, what we call moksha, nirvana. And yet, it doesn't matter how you get in. So, all of the different ashrams have their own platforms, their own ghats. You can go down marble steps, you can go down a concrete ramp, you can go in off a sandy beach, you can jump off a rock. It doesn't matter. The goal is get in Ganga. And Ganga as the goddess, the grantor of liberation, she's not giving extra bonus points based on how you got in. So she's not saying, oh, you did the triple backflip off the rock. Okay, you get, expedited liberation or bonus liberation. Doesn't matter how you get in. All that matters is get in. And in the same way, in our spiritual connection, all that matters is we feel connected, whether it comes through a path of devotion, what we call bhakti, whether it comes through a path of wisdom, what we call gyan. So, reading of the scriptures, learning of the scriptures, reading of commentaries by different mystics, by different sages, through going within and asking, who am I? Who am I? Whether through a path of karma yoga, through letting every single action be in service of the divine, whatever it may be, how to offer every minute, every action as your yoga, whether it's a path of Raja Yoga, seated in meditation, in prayer, in japa. It doesn't matter. The Bhagavad Gita speaks about all these different paths with equal fervence, equal fervor, equal excitement. Whatever path works for you is exactly the right way in. And so don't worry about what your path is. All that matters is you walk it, and you walk whatever path is the easiest for you to peel back that veil.
Really, such a gift to hear you speak these words. And, I can speak for myself as to have you as a guide in my life over the past, will be 10 years now. And this book, for those who have read it, if you're listening to this recording later, it's the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, I know a couple of us have had this conversation. We've read it more than once. And yet, it's that book you pick up and you think, did I even read that before? Like, how am I hearing this for the first time? I think there's such beauty in, as a sadhana, as listening to someone who's walked this path with such sincere faith, so I thank you so much for that example. We will be there in February. We'll be back. We're staying at Parmarth this year, and all are welcome. We'll be at Parmarth for Mahashivratri. So as I've shared with many, is this your words of that night, I remember touching me that you said you have a real chance of freedom on that night, that you give to Shiva all that is ready to be to be given. And so everyone is most welcome to come and share that experience with us. And so I'll just leave our conversation there so we can drink in your words and be with your teachings. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course, and so much love to all of you. And I look so forward to hopefully welcoming you here. If people have questions, feel free, give them to Deborah. She can send them in, or our team is really good at picking them up from social media, and they bring the questions into me for our evening satsang. So we always start the evening satsang with a question that comes in from our global family. So please do feel free to send in any questions. And the satsang gets live streamed, so you can then watch it either in real time or later. And our team also tries to be really good about sending messages and emails about like when your question gets picked up, so that if you're not able to tune in every night, at least you're able to see the one where we addressed your question.
It's perfect. So if you do follow Paramath Nikatan on all, it's on everything really, isn't it? On Facebook and Instagram.
The satsang is streamed on Sadhvi.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
As the only place now? So Arti is still.
Arti is still on Paramarthanikathan. Satsang is streamed on Sadhvi ji on
Perfect.
YouTube and Instagram both.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Of course. And so much love to all of you. And I hope you have beautiful rest of your evenings.
Thank you.
And I hope to welcome you as soon as possible here to Rishikesh.
I can't wait. It's been too long already. Thank you
Well,
so
so
much.
much love, Deborah, of course. And I'm so sorry, by the way, about the mix up last week.
It all worked perfectly. It was meant to be now. Thank you.
So much love.
So much love. I'll pause the recording here.